Good evening. I'm Tony Clark from the Carter Presidential Library and Museum. I'm really pleased you all are here tonight. And tonight's topic about the economy and the future is really important right now because this past week I've heard, as you probably have as well, reports. Social Security is going to run out of money, Medicare cuts, social safety net issues are on the line right now. There are all kinds of questions and decisions that are going to be made in the future. And the important thing is to have you all help make those decisions. Here to begin our program tonight and to introduce our speaker is civil rights activist and co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Aisha Garza. She is a strategist, an organizer, founder of Black Futures Lab, which tries to make enable black communities to have power over their future, because that's what all communities deserve, having power over all aspects of their life. So please join me in welcoming Aisha Garza.
Good evening. Oh, good evening. I am really, really excited for the conversation tonight. My name is Aisha Garza, and I am the former principal almost, of the Black Futures Lab and the Black to the Future Action Fund, a co-founder of the Black Lives Matter Global Network, and now a new senior vice president at the JPB Foundation as the senior vice president for movement infrastructure and explorations. And tonight, I want to open up our conversation just by setting a little context. I don't have to tell y'all that we're living in a world that is shaped by crisis. If you're like me, you wake up each morning not wanting to turn on the TV or listen to the news, because what else could happen, right? We're living in somewhat of a dystopia. Today's world is filled with extreme income inequality that is racist by design. Systems that were designed to keep people out and leave people behind have gotten worse and worse. More and more of us are experiencing multiple crises at the same time, from lack of access to healthcare and rights to making decisions over our own lives and the lives of people we care about, not being whittled away, but being blasted away with dynamite. More and more of us are trying to take care of aging parents and loved ones while also trying to raise families, while also trying to make ends meet in a context where the price of everything keeps increasing. Our planet is literally on fire, figuratively and literally, and at the same time underwater. Climate chaos is reaching more and more people every single day. And on top of that, our government is falling apart at the seams, due in part to increasing corporate power, due in part to a rising fascist coalition that is driven both by a thirst for power and a hunger to return back to times that people who dared to resist drove into the past. That's the context that we're in. And for many people who are experiencing this every single day, there's a choice to be made. You can decide to close your ears and hunker down, hope that somebody else will take care of it, or you can choose to fall into despair and think that nothing can change, or you can choose to join movements that have said no more. We are in an election year, in a state that has changed the nation many, many, many times over. I'm proud to say that this state is the home of movements that have reshaped our government, reshaped our society, and reshaped our economy. From Dorothy Bolden and the National Domestic Worker Union that was started here in the 1880s, to the washerwomen strikes, to the many, many waves of civil rights organizing and women's rights organizing. This state has a critical role to play. So as we face this set of choices of what we do in this moment, do we hunker down, turn off the lights and close the shades? Do we fall into despair and say, nothing I do will matter in this moment, so I'm just gonna try to take care of me at any cost? Or do we join with other people who are dreaming of and longing for a better future and figure out how to chart the path to get there? What I'm so, so grateful for with Natalie's contribution to us is that Natalie really reminds us that history is only shaped by people who dare not just to dream, but to act. And tonight you are going to hear from a whole crew of dynamic, powerful, courageous visionaries who dared to see into the future, come back to the present and say, how do we get there? I am very proud to introduce and bring up to the stage Aisha Nyandoro, who is the founding CEO of Springboard to Opportunities, which is a Jackson, Mississippi nonprofit that has pioneered a radically resident-driven approach to ending generational poverty. In 2018, she launched the Magnolia Mothers Trust, a first-of-its-kind guaranteed income program for single Black mothers, and through its success, she has become a national leader in the fight for a guaranteed income at the federal level. Can we give it up? Next up is Samira Vasili, who was most recently the Deputy Director of the National Economic Council for the Biden administration, where her portfolio included industrial policy, supply chain resilience, and regional economic development. Before joining the NEC during the Biden administration, she served on the Biden-Harris transition team as personnel lead for economic agencies. Her work in finance has spanned consumer, housing, small business, and microfinance. Please welcome Samira. And last but certainly not least, our star for the evening, Natalie Foster, who is a leading architect of the movement to build an inclusive and resilient economy that works for all. President and co-founder of Economic Security Project and Aspen Institute, and an Aspen Institute Fellow. Her work and writing has appeared in the New York Times, USA Today, Time, Business Insider, CNN, and The Guardian. Natalie speaks regularly on economic security, the future of work, and the new political economy. An unstoppable builder, Natalie previously founded the Sharing Economy Community Peers and co-founded Rebuild the Dream with Van Jones, and served as digital director for President Obama's Organizing for America, a leading partner in winning transformative healthcare reform. Please give it up.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
I think it's on. All right, y'all. So this is how this is going to work. Okay, we're ready? So I am so happy to be here with you all this evening, but the thing is, Natalie and I are friends in real life. We just don't sort of kind of know each other. We're really good friends. And when I was packing to come over from Mississippi last night, my husband was like, "Are you nervous?" I said, "No, me and Natalie, let's go have a living room conversation in front of other people. So, welcome to our living room, okay? So, the rules of the living room. Yeah, what happens in my living room stays in my living room, okay? Unless you are posting good stuff about us on social media, we'll take that. Otherwise, we're only putting good things out there, all right? But I am so excited to have the conversation. And like I say, Natalie and I are good friends. And I'll give you a little bit about our origin story because I think it's important to the conversation we're having today. So, Natalie and I met 8 years ago. 8 years ago, before guaranteed income was a term in the mainstream media, in our homes, in our daily conversations. And we met because I was just dreaming about how to give cash to mamas in Mississippi. And I mentioned this to someone, and they said, "Oh, you need to have a conversation with Chris Hughes." I said, "Well, all right, let me talk to Chris Hughes. Let me figure out how to get to him." Went online because that's what you do when I didn't quite have the social capital I have now. So I went online and tried to figure out how to get to Chris Hughes. And I saw a friend's name there, and I said, "Okay, this friend can introduce me to Chris." It was Courtney. Courtney said, "You don't need to talk to Chris, you need to talk to Natalie. That's really who's doing the work." I said, "All right, let me talk to Natalie then." And Natalie and I had our first conversation. You were walking down a street to go somewhere, and I was in my office, and it was our first dreaming session of many dreaming sessions that we have had over the last 8 years. And I am so happy to be in conversation with you about this beautiful gift that you have given to all of us as it relates to the guarantees.
Thank you so much, Aisha. And my memory of that, I remember walking down the street and hearing your vision and thinking, wow, to the point Alicia just made, this woman is a dreamer. And you dreamed into the future. You painted a world that even then I could barely imagine where there would be a demonstration of guaranteed income in Jackson, Mississippi. And then you went and did it. And then I remember we both had second babies.
We did. We had second babies, y'all.
You went on leave. And then you said, I'm done dreaming. I'm ready to build.
Yeah.
I said, let's build, Aisha.
And that's exactly and that's where we started 8 years ago. And that project that we dreamt up together was the Magnolia Mothers Trust, which is currently the longest guaranteed income program in the country, focused specifically on Black mamas.
You can clap for that. Yes.
Jackson, Mississippi, of all places. So I think it's so great that we're having this conversation in this location in the South, the city of MLK, an early advocate of guaranteed income, who was brought the idea because of the work of Black women like Johnny Tillman, work that I am proud to continue with the support of visionaries like Natalie. So, without further ado, let's start this living room conversation, shall we?
Let's do it.
All
With our
right,
Jimmy
y'all.
Carter portrait. And
I don't know. But it's so funny you mentioned that, y'all. So growing up in my living room, in my grandmother's living room, she had a picture of her shaking Jimmy Carter's hand. A kitchen. I'm gonna send you a picture of that picture.
I'd love to
It
see
was
that.
in her living room. So now I have Jimmy Carter backdrop in my living room. We paid it forward.
well, my aunt Nezzie had a Jimmy Carter piece of direct mail that was like not really signed by him, but kind of, that she framed, that I have now in my office.
I love that so much.
So she also would love this very much.
I love that. Thank you. So let's start with just an overview of the types of guarantees that you cover in your book.
Yeah. So, this book envisions an economy that we deserve in America, regardless of race, religion, and zip code. And it says that the government could guarantee a set of economic rights. And those guarantees could be the guarantee of debt-free college, the guarantee of homes, a guarantee of health care, a guarantee of good work, of an inheritance, colloquially known as a baby bond, which is being piloted soon, hopefully right here in Atlanta, thanks to Hope Woolensak's work, which we'll talk about shortly. The guarantee of income, like the work that we get to do together. And then the guarantee of family care. And one of Alicia Garza's many bios, many other things in her bios, that she spent time at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which has paved the way for the idea of a guarantee of family care. So those are the 7 that I'm laying out. But They're simply there to be demonstration of how far these ideas have moved. The idea is a guarantee economy broadly. This morning on the radio at WAB, Rose Scott said, maybe we should have a MARTA guarantee, a guarantee of transportation. I thought that's a great idea, because once you start to imagine what could be guaranteed, then we can start to build it. But we only can build it if we can imagine it. And so that's what this book did for me, and I hope does for those who read it.
I love so much of that, and with the book where you just were landing with imagination, because it really is just about whether or not we are leaning into our radical imagination and willing to vision a world or a future that we can't see, recognizing that, okay, not only am I envisioning this world for myself and my family, but for future generations to come. And that takes a lot of guts and gutsy and oompa to be able to do that. And not only does it take all of those things, it takes grabbing on to hope that sometimes we can't quite see. As you know, when Alicia was doing her intro, when you wake up, you are constantly bombarded by all the ills of the world immediately before you even get out your bed, in a lot of instances, if you just grab your smartphone. So when you sit down to start writing this book under the backdrop of a pandemic, under the backdrop of the Capitol literally trying to be taken over, under the backdrop of everything else that was happening within the context of our country, what inspired you, and what are you hoping that readers will walk away with?
So I have been heads down building the income guarantee movement with leaders like you and Mayor Tubbs. So let me take my hand at telling the story, and then you pile on. 7-8 years ago in Jackson, Mississippi, you dreamed Magnolia Mothers Trust up. And at the same time in Stockton, California, the youngest mayor in American history, Mayor Michael Tubbs, was doing the same thing. And both of you would start to receive texts and calls saying, how are you doing this? I want this in my community. How do we do this? And you would both open source your playbook, literally write it out, put it up, and invite others in. And it would start to spread across the country. And so in the case of Stockton, it was 125 families received $500 a month with no strings attached. It sat alongside their wages and created a floor for people to live on. And I'll let you talk about the Magnolia Mothers Trust. And from there, it spread, it started replicating. 150 cities now have these demonstrations, including right here in Atlanta. And mayors have signed on, nonprofit leaders. And then the pandemic would hit, and we would see the expanded child tax credit pass, which, even though it has a boring name, it is a guaranteed income for families. Every parent in America got a check debited directly into their account. So that is warp speed to go from Aisha and Michael demonstrating this idea to hundreds of cities to a federal policy. And as I put my head up, I thought, it's not just guaranteed income. It is the guarantee of family care, which is now understood to be infrastructure in America that we must invest in to enable other types of work. It is a guarantee of homes that, we passed a national historic eviction moratorium in this country. We gave people money to keep them in their homes, to support being able to pay for rent and mortgage. We mobilized the National Guard to put free vaccines in people's arms and made COVID care basically free. So the guarantees were moving forward, and I wanted to write about that. So I sat down to do it and to chronicle the advocates and activists who've laid the groundwork for years to a moment. And it's actually Milton Friedman, one of the grandfathers of, frankly, trickle-down economics and neoliberalism, who had a quote that I found really thoughtful, which is, "It is only in a crisis, real or perceived, when progress happens and ideas that are lying around are picked up and they're moved forward." And that is what happened during the pandemic era. And so I myself found there to be more progress than I had understood. And so I wanted to write about it.
I love that so much. So during the pandemic, what you said is, while I was developing a struggle garden with my baby, because that's all it was. It was a struggle garden with my child. You were out here being inspired.
I mean, there were struggle gardens over here too. Don't worry.
But I love that so much. And when you think about the guarantees and how it are these layers in which we'll all benefit from, and just really thinking about the skeptics who are out there that will always say, okay, well, what about me? Could you explain a little for individuals how the guarantees, specifically a guaranteed income, will benefit the entire community and benefit the entire economy if we really did lean into the radical imagination?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that with the expanded child tax credit, for every $1 that went out to parents, there were $8 in return of social and economic gain that the community benefited from when people had money in their pockets. We know that this country has seen a historic decline in small business creation for decades throughout the period of trickle-down economics. During the pandemic, when people had stimulus checks and guaranteed income through the child tax credit and unemployment insurance, it was the first time we saw an increase in small business creation. It went up 24% in 2021 and 2022. That benefits the whole economy. So I think there are lots of benefits to the sort of the numbers. There's also the benefits that don't show up on the ledger. And I'm going to tell one story about those benefits, and then I would love for you to do the same, given how close you are to that work. In Stockton, and what I'm referring to here is the benefit of time. Right now, people work 2 jobs, 3 jobs to make ends meet, to pay the rent, and to put food on the table. And with a guaranteed income, people were able to purchase time. Yes, groceries. Yes, pay the bills. Yes, put money away, but also time. And so there is a father, Tomas, and his story really stuck with me. And it was that the first check came in and he thought, I don't know if I can count on this. So he kind of held on to it. Then the next month came. He thought, this is really going to happen. So he spent a little bit, but then held on. And the third month came and he said, okay, I think I can quit my third job as a mechanic. And so he did. And he took his kids to the pool one Saturday morning and he sat on the side of the pool and he watched them swim. And he thought, I didn't know my kids knew how to swim. I'd never been able to spend a leisurely Saturday morning with them. And that's what he was able to buy, the presence of time. But I want to ask you, because you've now been through 8 years, right? 6 of Magnolia Mothers Trust participants. And I have heard incredible stories from when I got to visit Jackson and from when I hear you talk, like you on the Kelly Clarkson show last week, and your TED Talk a couple of weeks ago, which everybody should go home and review.
Watch that TED Talk, y'all. No, thank you for that, Natalie, for that shameless plug. We accept all plugs, y'all. That's the good news that we can post. We should accept all plugs. And so when I love that, the presence of time. And when I think about our work, I always think about is the dreams that families are able to lean into. And I think those of us who do not have income scarcity don't quite recognize how important dreams are, or how a life without dreams, what that actually looks like. And so, people always get caught up in our work with guaranteed income. Oh, what do people buy? And I'm like, that's the least sexy part about guaranteed income. And not only that, I'm like, that's so capitalistic. What do people buy? Of course, they bought stuff. It's money. What do you do when you get money? You buy stuff. So let's not have that conversation. But what we always hear about is how our moms are able to go back to school, get out of debt, dream about the future, recognize that they are actually entitled to dream. One year, one of our moms said that, I thought a good life was only for those type of people, not recognizing that she could have a good life. Our very first year, one of our moms went, and she had not seen her father in 14 years. She lived in Jackson, Mississippi. Her father lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Her kids had never met their grandfather. They had only had communications via Zoom, or not Zoom, chat with your phone. FaceTime, y'all. Woo, yes, FaceTime. I was like, Facebook, that's not it. FaceTime. That only had conversations via FaceTime because no one ever had the disposable income. And so she was able to take her kids during spring break to meet their grandfather in person for the first time. She didn't get on the plane. She didn't do anything luxurious like that. She just made sure that her car could make the 10-hour trip to Pennsylvania. So when I think about all that we're able to do with guaranteed income, it's the training about the future and not only what that does specifically for that participant, but what that does for the future generations as well, for their kids and their kids and paying it forward. So that's that visionary stuff that we need our funders and people to have.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying, and what we actually see come up in polling after poll, is that it's the individual, the dignity, the presence, but it's also the family level,
right.
and then the community
right.
level. Because it doesn't matter if I get mine, as Alicia said earlier. If everybody doesn't have it, then none of us really, truly have it.
And that's community.
That's community.
Oh, so good. Now, y'all, my living room is lit. So good. So, in the book, one of the things so many aspects of your book that I love, but one of the things that you say in the book is that how the architects of the guaranteed look, how different they look from the policymakers who have been designing our society since the country's founding. Specifically, you state, these are not your grandma's wonks. How do you see representation affecting how policies are shaped?
That is a great question. Yeah, I track the guarantees. Sort of the way I frame it up is like, follow an advocate. So in the case of guaranteed income, you get a little bit of Dr. Aisha's story, who has been laying the groundwork to the point where, there'd be the political opening and there would be a pandemic possibility. And I was struck by how many of them were women, by how many of them were women of color. And I was also struck by the economists who were doing the work. One of the things that you and I have talked a lot about is this framework, Black Women Best, that Dr. Janelle Jones has come up with. And she was formerly at the Department of Labor. She's now an economist at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. And she argues that instead of looking at the median worker to know how unemployment rate is going, what wages are, look at Black women. What is the unemployment rate for Black women? What is the unemployment rate with the median wages for Black women? And that's how you'll know the health of the overall economy. And so if we center Black women and build an economy that works for them, then it will work for everybody. And I found that to be so compelling. And I think, it's important that it comes from Janelle. And so I was struck by the shifts that we've seen. And then also the other thing that's noteworthy is in the 2020 primary, which I also talk about, as the primary of ideas, where if you are interested on the ticket left of center, there were a number of candidates running that also looked and talked differently than any candidates we'd had before. And I think that reflects an America. And it reflects an America that is, this multiracial democracy that we are trying to build.
Representation matters, and I think that's so important when you intentionally painted a picture of what advocates and architects look like that sometimes goes against what you typically think about when you think of policymakers or when you think of economists. So I think that was a very intentional move on your part, and I think it matters because when individuals are picking up your book and reading it in high schools, hopefully very soon, they'll be able to see themselves in the architects that you are highlighting, and that will also help push the work forward because we need good people doing good work.
We do.
So in the book, you also talk about how many people think that guarantees are socialism, but that in reality, capitalism is based on guarantees. I was struck by that thought and that provocation that you made. So can you expound on that for me as well as for our audience?
Absolutely. I'm not one for isms, so I think there's some people who would get excited about isms, and you can continue to do that. But what really stuck with me as I started reflecting on this was that one, guarantees are fundamental to our modern capitalism. If you're a business in this country, you have the guarantee of the monetary system, of courts, of patents. Shareholders have guarantees of liability to protect them against any corporate activity that goes awry. And so I'm arguing we should extend those guarantees out to the everyday people who make this economy work. And I frankly think what we're naming and what we are starting to see happen across the country, as I've talked about with the housing guarantee getting closer to a healthcare guarantee in the pandemic, is that this is an evolution of capitalism. Venture capitalist Roy Bahat calls it trampoline capitalism. That if there were a way, if there's a floor, if we invest in a floor of people, then they can jump up, right, and continue to do the sort of entrepreneurial ingenuity, the creativity that we know exists in this country, but is unevenly, it's evenly distributed, but unevenly recognized, as Raj Chetty talks about, the idea of lost Einsteins, that because of economic precarity, there's so much brilliance that this country isn't able to harness. So I am arguing that it should be an evolution of capitalism, and frankly that we're in a moment of transition. And what gave me some heart is that I grew up right as Ronald Reagan was elected. I'm 45 years old, and it was that period of time where a new paradigm would enter the American discourse. A paradigm that said that you could call it trickle-down economics, like I've been calling it, call it neoliberalism. But you can sum it up by total faith in the market, zero faith in government, and people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. That was the economic orthodoxy that both sides of the aisle operated with for the last 50 years. But it has not always been the economic orthodoxy in this country. There are very different conceptions of how government should have a hand in rebalancing the economy and pushing an economy that works for everyone. And so I'm simply saying, let's be out with the old story and in with a next story that is about what we can guarantee in this country.
So it seems really simple when you explain it that way, and it seems as if it would be in all of our benefit to recognize that the guarantees would benefit the economy for all of us. How do we go about ushering in that new story?
Well, I'm going to ask you that too, because I think you have thought so deeply about narrative work and the power of, opening up the imagination that your work with the Magnolia Mothers Trust has done. I'll start by saying one of the ways we usher in that story is by seeing the actual progress around us. So let me talk for a second about debt-free college, the guarantee of college, is what maybe higher education. That went from an idea that was honestly laughed out of the room when I was in the Obama administration to Rose Garden events in this current administration as they announce yet another several $1 billion of student debt that they're canceling. That wasn't understood to be something the government could do. But it is, it turns out. And it gets us even closer to the idea of debt-free college, a college guarantee in America. And there was a period where higher education was understood to be a public good. And now it's understood to be a personal investment, right? That one has to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans to get. I mean, as we are talking, college in many places has hit $100,000 a year. So that's one thing we have to see the progress around us and name it. And I think that there is a way in which sometimes we struggle with that, particularly people who are activists, because there's a way in talking about the progress that almost feels like it minimizes the problems. But I think our work is to do both, hold the problems and name the progress.
No, I agree with that. We definitely have to do a better job of doing both and. But I also think a lot of times what it is that we do, we are, unlike you who lifted your head up to actually see the progress that we've made, a lot of times we are so drenched in the problems and just heads down that you just keep trudging towards the next thing because you feel as if the problems are ever mounting. So I think that for me, hearing your story and specifically how you said, I lifted my head up, I was like, holy crap, I actually need to lift my head up. No, it's that simple. You just get caught up in the work. It's that simple to just lift your head up. But while you are lifting your head up, to make sure that you are telling the stories to others about how the work is changing, about the wins that we should celebrate. I don't think we do a good enough job celebrating within the movement. I think we never celebrate our wins because of the fact that we are constantly moving to the next. I know I never take a beat to celebrate when we do something well. I'm like, all right, great. That was one cohort. Let me raise the money for the next cohort. And so I think we, need to collectively recognize that we have to celebrate the wins and we have to do it big and loud so that it gives permission for others to celebrate as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And part of it too is there's a way we talk about the economy specifically where it's like the weather. It's like something that just happens to us. And actually it's like a house that we build every step of the way with outcomes that we get from the decisions that we make. And so I think even in our metaphors, it's important. But I do want to ask you, is there anything more on narrative that you've learned that you would share with us? As I think you've been one of the most visionary drivers of a new narrative of what we deserve in America.
Thank you for that. I have so many thoughts about narrative. I think that it's great that we have these conversations where we get to be the architects and storytellers, but I think we should do a better job of making sure that those who are impacted by the work that we're doing are empowered to share their narratives. I believe that as policymakers, we have to lean more into the storytelling and less on the numbers. Within the space, we always say that policy moves at the speed of stories. I think we have to make sure that we are introducing new stories into the conversation, but that we are not the ones actually introducing those stories. That is Tia and Tamara and Keisha and Shelika, those people who are actually impacted, that they are the storytellers, because we not only need to hear their stories, we need to see their faces. We need to make sure that they understand the power of their story. And I think that there are so many ways that we are doing that as a movement with all of the narrative work that we have all collectively been doing over the last few years. Earlier you were talking about what happened during the pandemic with the child tax credit. For 6 months, you could not turn on the TV, listen to a podcast, read a paper without there being a story about how families were being impacted by the child tax credit. That was narrative work that we all did extremely well. And so I think we have to make sure that we are doing narrative work, not just in the seasons when we're trying to get to a win. We have to make sure that we're doing the narrative work year round, that is the work in and of itself.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think here in Atlanta, Hope has done such a good job of building in her hands around the participants, and Ashe, who does a lot of the cultural strategy with the women who are participating in her hands. And I think it's meant a lot to its success in Georgia. So,
Only so. Yeah, it's a lot of great work happening here in Georgia around narrative and economic shifting. So I want to ask one final question before we bring Shamira up for her closing remarks, and then we'll have Q&A. So I like to end these conversations with, when we're talking about heavy stuff. This is lighthearted, but a little heavy as well. What is giving you hope in this moment, Miss Natalie Foster?
well, Mariama Kaba says hope is a discipline. And that has been very meaningful to me because like we've said, as we scroll, it can feel like very overwhelming. But if it's a discipline, if it's a thing every day I have to wake up and say, I know this can get better, and I see the people building it, that is the discipline that I have tried to cultivate. One story to leave you with, and then I hope you'll do the same. What's giving you hope? Very recently in Flint, Michigan, Flint, a city that America has left behind in so many ways. may now be showing us the way out of poverty, because Dr. Mona Hanna-Tisha is a pediatrician, and she has launched a guaranteed income program in Flint for mothers. And every child born in Flint over the next several years, their mom will receive a check every month with no strings attached. And it is, while Congress fritters away and can't pass the expanded child tax credit, while we have states that are rolling back and actually passing laws to ban guaranteed income pilots, 4 states have done that this year. We see places like Flint saying, no, every child, regardless of race, religion, zip code, in this city will get these checks, because that's what they deserve right here in Flint and broadly across the country.
I love that work so much, and that's one of the pieces that does give me hope. And like yourself, for me, hope is a discipline. In doing this work, I have to make sure that I am hopeful daily, because otherwise I'll take it home to my kids and my husband, and they would not appreciate that. So every day I actually have a practice. I'm a student of Octavia Butler, who was a futurist way before her time. And one of her quotes that one of her quotes is, everything that you touch, you change. Everything you change changes you. So every day before I leave my office, I write down, what did I change today? What changed me today? And that's one of the pieces that gives me hope. But he mentioned the fights against guaranteed income. Y'all, the fights against guaranteed income actually give me hope because of the fact that they recognize that we are a powerful movement, not to be messed with, and that we are going to win these guarantees for all of us. So the fact that we have made enough noise that people feel like they got to pass bills in order to not have it within their states or their cities, I am so excited about that. I'm like, yes, let's go. Give me something else to work on. Yes.
What's the saying? They ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you.
That's right.
But then what?
You win. So there we go. So we're at the fight phase. So I'm like, yes, bring on the fight. Winning's right around the corner. And when we win, I retire. So that's what gives me hope. And bringing on Samira.
Samira Fazili.
Thank you, everyone. I guess I should start off and ask, how many of you bought the book yet? Okay, good. How many of you read the book already? It's only been out 2 weeks. Okay. I just want to make sure you bought the book, because Alicia started off talking a bit about, we just feel like we're in this world of crisis, crisis, crisis. And when you pick up and read this book, you're going to be like, we're in a world of hope. And it's a book about strategy and hope and how you get to change and how we can get to change quite quickly. So I want to bring us back to that frame of we are the agents of change, and this book kind of reminds you of that. So Alicia mentioned I worked in the Biden administration. I worked in the Biden White House. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about where we were, where we are, and where we're going. Natalie likes to say that her book is a lot about the outside game, and I am the person who is the inside game. So I'll give you a little bit of that sneak peek of what it's like to move this work on the inside of government. So let me start with where we were. And I'm going to go way back. The book kind of starts about 2010, Occupy Wall Street, right, if I remember.
The
2008 financial crisis. So where we were. In 2010 is when I entered the Obama administration, and I went to work at the Treasury Department as an economic policy advisor. And I had been on the front lines of the foreclosure crisis, trying to help people save their homes, trying to hold the banks accountable. And I was so green, so idealistic. And I was like, I'm going to get there and make sure people, not banks, are getting the resources they need to save their homes, to save their businesses. For those of us, and it looks like some of you are old enough to remember the Great Recession, Washington's answer to that was to trust Wall Street to fix the problems that Wall Street created. And they handed out $750 billion of dollars, taxpayer dollars, to the banks instead of giving the money to the homeowners. But I got to Treasury in 2010. I'm like, we can fix this. We can do stuff. We can really get the money to Main Street. And me and some of the people I worked for and with fought like hell in that Treasury Department to try to get more of that TARP money set aside for community financial institutions and minority-owned banks.
And the people inside Treasury, the leadership was like, we can't do that. That doesn't work. Or like, we're really nervous. And then Occupy Wall Street started. And people on the Hill in Congress and people in the building were like, actually, can you give us those proposals you had again? And they realized people were really fed up with bailouts to the richest and not those who needed it the most. So because there was that outside group pushing, Congress started pressuring Treasury to do more for Main Street. People like me on the inside who had designed Main Street programs that could work, were technically sound, blah, 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 had a window when we could move it. And so we ended up investing over $500 million, basically $1 billion in these smaller institutions. $500 million, $600 million we got out of TARP, and $200 million we got Congress to give us more because the lawyers at Treasury wouldn't let me do it with TARP dollars. But we got it passed. We got to legislate it. I want to fast forward through Natalie's book a little bit because in 2020, when we have the COVID recession and Congress is looking at ideas, the only part of the the Great Recession programs that they replicated was this program. They took it and put $12 billion at Treasury to invest in minority banks and financial institutions. And then when the Biden administration entered, we were able to get the child tax credit expansion that helped lift so many children out of poverty. Child poverty was halved in America in 2021 because of the child tax credit. So that's where we were and where we got to, and so where do we stand now? Part of what made the Biden economic strategy so different from Obama's are the stories that Natalie tells in this book. We had it's 4 pieces to what I think was the magic. We had strong movement organizations on the outside organizing people to push for different types of policies out of their government. These movement organizations, and this book will catalog all these stories, were connected to networks of academics and policy wonks who could work out the technical details behind this stuff. And because of stuff that Aisha, you had done, we had what's called an evidence base. People had done studies and said this stuff works. So we had the evidence base that the wonks inside Washington want you to have. We had the receipts. And then third, we had political leaders, not just in Washington, but in mayor's offices, in governor's offices, and state legislatures saying, we want this, we can do this, we should do this. And then the last piece is because President Biden was the one in office, we had people on the inside. And the president made you guys talked about how important people are or something. The mantra of the transition team that I was on was people are policy. And there were all these amazing dreams in the Democratic primary of all these new things we're going to do. None of that gets done unless you have a staff you bring in who know how to do it, who want to do it, and who have relationships with the groups on the outside who are pushing for this stuff, who want this stuff, and can lift up the stories, Aisha, you talked about. Because I loved what you said. You wrote it down because I would forget it if I didn't write it. Policy moves at the speed of stories. But those stories can't get to the policymakers at the right moment if they don't have that relationship. And we had people on the inside who had the relationship, who had the will, and wanted to design policies that worked and put people first. And as Natalie said, we really moved so much in these past 4 years as a country in terms of flipping economic orthodoxy or perceived orthodoxy on its head and saying trickle down doesn't work. Investing in people is what works, and that drives innovation, resilience, and growth in our economy. So where are we now, and where are we going? Well, first, where we are now, and I know that the economy is not perfect right now. I know inflation is there and costs are rising for so many, but there are so many bright spots on the horizon. Like you said, we have to take a moment to celebrate some of the things we have been able to do. Natalie, you talked about the business creation we're seeing. We've had the fastest rate of business creation for Black-owned small businesses in more than 30 years. GDP growth has been at 3% and higher for multiple years. Low unemployment has been below 4% for more than 2 years. Here in Georgia, since all of us live in Georgia, we're seeing historic investments in clean energy. Like Georgia's going to decarbonize our economy. We're building solar panels. We're building the EV batteries. We're building the electric vehicles. And, we've made progress on trying to lower people's healthcare costs, right? Like we passed bills that are going to cap insulin costs at $35 a month. So where we're going and what's at stake looking ahead is, as Alicia kind of said, we're in an election year. And I think of all the guarantees that you laid out, and we have the chance to try to enact some of those. But we need the money to do that, to pay for those. And in 2025, we have a huge tax fight because all Trump did when he was in office, his biggest accomplishment was to give a big tax cut to the richest Americans. And in 2025, those tax cuts expire. They expire. And so we get a moment, will you clap? But, right, if Trump's in office again, he's going to give more handouts to the richest instead of raising the money we need to pay for these guarantees. So a lot is at stake. And if we put Trump and his allies back in office, we have so much to lose. And what I want to remind folks too, and what this book does such a brilliant job of, who's going to save America? It's not Washington, it's us. We, the people, are the ones who save America every time. And we save it by putting the right people into office, but then holding them accountable, keeping pressure on those elected leaders. And we elect people at every level of government who call for these things. It's not just people in Washington. It's our elected leaders here in Georgia too. And we organize people to make these demands. And I hope we're able to keep moving forward and not risk going backwards, because we have so much momentum behind this people first approach to economics, not the corporation first. And we've shown that equity is the better growth strategy for America. So let's keep moving forward.
All right. So we have a couple of questions that have been provided to Hannah. Okay, great. And if you have any questions, please get those to Hannah, because we have a little time for Q&A. And you have 3 architects, 3 visionaries here. So y'all better take advantage. So the first question we have is, how do we build where these guarantee movements... hold on, y'all. I'm sorry. I got overconfident. I just got overconfident for a second. Hello. I know. That's me. I'm in my living room. I was like, I can see. You cannot. Okay. How do we build where these guarantee movements are working together rather than in opposition?
Well, I can take a stab at that, and then would love to hear your thoughts on that. It's my experience that people aren't really working in opposition per se, but heads down doing their work. If you're in the housing space, housing is extraordinarily technical. And to even have the big picture that we've left housing entirely to the private market, while very little role in the public sphere to spur both housing production and protect renters and the most vulnerable in the housing space. That story isn't even in when you're just trying to get affordable units built. So it's every one of these guarantee spaces is technical. I mean, I would argue that maybe the most is healthcare. If you think of the guarantee of healthcare, and you have people along the whole continuum who just say we should have Medicare for all, to people who say, look, we need to expand the Affordable Care Act, work with what we've got and build it out. And, we've actually done that. In the pandemic, we saw the Affordable Care Act expand and be the lowest, the point in history where we've had the lowest number of uninsured Americans, which was unfathomable 14 years ago when it passed, to be honest with you, if you remember the sort of riots that were happening around the country, the Tea Party and all of that. So all that to say, they're highly technical. And I think it's not that people work in opposition, it's just that they have to do their work. And so I do think some of our work is knitting it all together so we can all feel part of something bigger. When you work on one of these issues, you're working for the guarantee economy or economic rights, and can feel part of a bigger movement.
Actually, I want to get to this question because I think this is a good one for you, Samira. How do you envision this work to continue to play out if the election sways to the right? Not groaning, y'all.
All right. I mean, one, it also depends what happens with Congress, because divided government allows us to try to move some of these ideas through one of the chambers of Congress. And so we have to pray to God that if Trump wins the presidency, Democrats take back the House or hold the Senate. So that's thing one. Thing two, we have to get really serious about electing the kind of governors we want around the country, because we got to be serious about electing the right governors. I know you guys tried. Mississippi, you guys were closed, and we got 2026 here, and I'm already like this on Georgia for 26. Because America is a bottom-up country by design, and the things that become permanent federal policy are things that have been tested and tried at the state and local level. So if the national election swings to the right, then we just run all these experiments at the state and local level, and we put pressures on the governors to do more and more of it, so that in 26 we take back one of the chambers of Congress, and we get to try to move some of these ideas because we've tested, proven, organized, and done a ton of narrative work to convince more and more people to come on board with us.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think the one other thing I'll add is that the power of a paradigm is that it is so pervasive that both parties adhere to it. That is the power of the neoliberal paradigm. Over the past 50 years, both parties adhered to total faith in the market, zero faith in government, tell people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And so I think there's also some young signs right of center. And there's plenty of people left of center who don't agree, who are still stuck in an old story. And right of center, there are some signs that they're open to post-neoliberal thinking. And so I also think that I want to see more of that. So that's the one that I'll say as well.
All right, we have time for one more question from the stage, but we will all be here doing the book signing if you've not bought your book, and you can ask your question at that time. Plug. Okay. What do you think is America's economic future going to be? Is your goal to help with economic struggles? If so, what are your goals to help?
Well, to be honest, I think we are at a crossroads. I mean, I think the question is, what do we think America's economic future is? I think that is exactly what we're here talking about. That there is one path that is a much more authoritarian, austere, racist path, xenophobic path that we could go down. And there is another path that is building on a world where we could guarantee homes and guarantee healthcare and guarantee income and good work. And I think that path is available to this country, but we have to choose it.
We're at this inflection point in this crossroads, so we don't fully know, right, what lies in our economic future. And it's clear that we can't have a strong economy if our people aren't strong and our people aren't invested in. So our economy goes where our people go, is thing one. Thing two, I see so many bright spots in our economy, and in part from so many of the investments and policies that I worked on. We are finally tackling the climate crisis with the urgency it deserves. And decarbonizing our economy is going to be a huge driver of quality job creation. And in part, it's going to be a driver of quality job creation, I think, because labor unions are organizing these workers. And so it's not like policymakers created those quality jobs. Unions built the middle class in America, and
they are trying really hard to organize factory after factory and place after place. I don't know how many of you are tracking that the UAW just organized a plant in Chattanooga. First time in 40 years a plant in the South got organized. It's incredible. And there's an upcoming election at Mercedes plants in Alabama next week. So we'll see if they succeed there. So I'm really hopeful and excited by how American public opinion has shifted. People's opinions of unions has kind of shifted, and the labor movement has changed. I mean, part of that was is that the labor movement changed and brought new people into the leadership to fight for workers and their rights, and really invest in the vision of a multiracial democracy.
Thank you. So, Natalie, thank you so much again for giving us this gift of the guarantee and for bringing your brilliance to my living room that is masquerading as the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library. And, I want to give it to you to give us the final remarks for this evening.
Yeah, I in the book I have this framing that a lot of our stories are grim dark. They are dystopic. They're the world can never get better. A lot of the genres that that are popular are grimdark. And the opposite of grimdark is noble bright, where there's a hero who comes in and saves the day. Sometimes they have superpowers. But there's a blogger in 2017 who came up with a different framing, and she calls it hope punk. And it's that it's neither of those things, that it's community knitted together, building bonds, moving forward, persistent, believing that hope is a discipline, that is what changes things. And so in that spirit, I would love if we could spend just a few minutes in an activity, which is to build a bond tonight. So what I'd love for you to do is turn to somebody next to you who you might not know and spend a minute talking to them as part of building this hope punk economics community. To further that thought, I take that into the economics realm and say that hope punk economics is what I want to talk about in this book as part of that framing. And so turn to somebody, your name, and how life under the guarantees would have been different for you or someone you love. How life with any one of these guarantees would have been different for you or someone you love. And we'll do 4 minutes where we're in discussion, and then we'll close up. So find a person you don't know and have that conversation.
Tonight has been fascinating. Natalie is going to be signing copies of her book. Acapella still has some more if you don't have a copy. Let's thank our speakers one more time.